Today's podcast is brought to you by newspapers.com, the ultimate destination for exploring the mysteries of the past. Now, most of my own work uncovering the world of Joe Petrosino and his Italian squad, their stories, the characters they battled, the dark history of the Black Hand, it's all been pieced together thanks to newspapers.com. And I have to tell you, they do what I love most, bringing the past back to life and ensuring it doesn't fade away in the crumbling pages of old newspapers. So whether you're into famous crimes or forgotten cases, newspapers.com gives you a front row seat to over 300 years of history. With more than 1 billion pages of newspapers from the U.S. and beyond, you can search it all in seconds. It's a goldmine of eyewitness accounts, crime scene photos, news reports, and more. And for our listeners, newspapers.com has a special offer. Use the code Italian Squad for an exclusive 20% discount on your subscription. That's promo code Italian Squad at newspapers.com.
Nobody knows your faces in Little Italy. You will be known as the Italian Squad. The idea is to make the Black Hand come to us. Capisci?
That was Ernest Borgnine as Joe Petrosino in the 1960 film Pay or Die. And it's a performance that left a lasting impression on a young John Turturro.
He's really good in that movie. And it got under my skin as a little kid.
When I sat down with John Turturro, our conversation touched on everything from growing up in Italian families to how the story of Italians and Italian immigration has played out on screen.
I'm more interested in Falcone, who got blown up, or Petrosino, someone who combated the worst of his community with the best of his community.
I'm Anthony Cicchino, and this is True Crimes of Black Hand, New York. If you could just state and spell your name.
My name is John.
Well, how do
My name is John Turturro.
Yeah.
That's how they say it here. In Italy, they say Turturro, Turturro, Turturro. In Spain, Turturro, which is the right way to say it, but no one rolls their R's here, so Turturro becomes Turturro, Tatara, Tortora, Tortorcha.
What do you mean, like?
I mean, I had a basketball coach. He could never say my name. So if I didn't start, he would say, Tatara. He was Irish, get in there. And all the guys on my team would just die laughing. Take me out now. He couldn't say it. So I said, why don't you just call me Toots or Tootie or something, But Turturro has got 3 R's, so it's Turturro, Turturro. And the genesis of the name, which I've been to Giovinazzo, which is in Puglia, they showed me the first signature of the name, and it's Turro, Turro. 2 separate words. Oh. It was an ancient walled city from 1000, 1100 on the Adriatic Sea. And that means the man in the tower.
Oh. So
I guess maybe we had 2 relatives in the tower, so it was Turro Turro and became Turturro.
Okay.
You know what I mean? And I have a lot of Turturros there. It's a very it's a name just from that region. It's not in other parts of Italy, and there are Turturros in Giovinazzo that I am not related to, but I have a lot of relatives. And my grandmother's name was Cortese, which is probably a Spanish derivative.
It's
and
a common
from when
name.
I've done my Discovering Your Roots, they said, I was like 18% Iberian. So, and I was like, oh, well, that explains a lot of what kind of music that I love and things that I've always responded to. So, besides, I think 5% Middle Eastern and a couple percent, Northern African and Sub-Saharan, and then all these little, little French, German, little Balkans, but basically overall with my mother and father together, like I'm 70%, I guess, Southern Italian. And my mother's family is from Palermo and Aragona in Sicily.
In Sicily.
In Sicily.
Yeah.
Their name was Inzarillo and Tarassi.
So then how long have your family been in the United States?
My mother's family came I guess in like, 1910, 1914, around there, they came. I think they got married in 1914 or something. So they were, in the early 1900s. My father was born in Giovinazzo. His father came here originally when he was 14, lived in Mount Vernon, Raphael, and then he went back. He was in the Italian Navy. He was like a gunner in the Navy, and then then I think he came back one more time. I think he established a residency on Ludlow Street. Then he went back. He got married. My grandmother got pregnant, and when he went back, she was pregnant, and that's when the laws changed, when they put the quotas in 1924.
Yeah.
And they basically, he couldn't bring them over until he became a citizen. He had a residency,
Yeah.
and it took him, I guess, like over 6 years.
Yeah.
And my father came to the United States in 31. So he was sort of, his first 6 years was under Mussolini.
Oh.
And
okay.
so he knew the Boy Scout, the Fascista Nada song, he knew all those songs and stuff. He lived in a pretty rural place, but the first time he ever met, he went through Ellis Island, and then he met his father.
Right. So, that sounds kind of familiar to my father's family. Came much earlier in the early 1900s, but my mother's mother was born in Italy, but her dad was already over here for 7 years before she even met him. And then when she came over, she didn't even know who this guy was. It was like,
that's right.
It was, wanted to give her a hug and stuff, and she remembers thinking, "Get this guy off of me."
Yeah.
Who is he? So sounds really familiar.
It was, I guess, seminal in their relationships, because my father never bonded with his father, and his father was pretty hard on him. And the second one, he bonded with.
Oh, I see. And
so,
the second one was born here in the United States?
All the rest was born here. And my father was probably the only one who could really speak. It is considered more of a dialect, Barese,
You just made me start thinking about some family psychology things. I gotta maybe do a little bit more digging into it.
Yes, that was a big wound for my father. Absolutely, because I think he always wanted his father's approval and stuff like that, and he was really, hard on him.
Yeah,
you know what I mean.
Yeah,
and,
for sure.
And my mother was very aware of that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I studied German. I went to Villanova University. I was a history major. I was a German major.
Why did you study German? I should interview you.
Yes, that's another issue.
That's another issue.
Maybe I'll come back to it.
Yeah.
But when I told my German, we were trying to talk about what was Thanksgiving like. And I told my German professor that we always have pasta dish or thing. She, I still remember her. She was just laughing. She's like, "You have," I was like, "Sure. Is that weird?"
Yeah, they always have pasta. I mean, there was always turkey, there was stuffing, there was all those, there was the Italian stuffing and the regular American stuffing. Italian stuffing had eggs and prosciutto and other things in it.
Yeah. But
usually there was some kind of, I'm pretty sure there was, it wasn't like, clam sauce or anything like that, but maybe maybe I don't know if there was a lasagna or ziti or something.
Yeah.
Maybe it's something like that
But it was always there, right?
But it was like if it was part of it. And it was the American holiday.
Yes, exactly. It was but it was something that my grandfather wanted.
Sure. Oh, right. Well, right. Well, they were used to that, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, my father would eat dinner sometimes, and my mother would make him steak, because he didn't have much steak growing up, because he didn't have a lot. And he'd have potatoes, and he would, it would be his American meal. And he really enjoyed that, and he was very, patriotic. Because he wound up, in the war and everything like that. But both my parents were quite. My mother worked in a Navy yard too, and they were very patriotic.
And when did you go back for the first time?
The first time was when I did a costume fitting for the Sicilian, 1986. That Michael Cimino did, and I went to Rome for a costume fitting. I went to Torelli's costume house, and I got quite drunk on the plane, because I had never flown first class, and they kept offering me caviar and blinis with vodka. And when I got off, I was like, what world am I in? And when I saw the Mussolini wedding cake building, it was like spinning, and I thought, wow, was this from a long time ago, or now? I couldn't figure it out because I was so drunk, and I was thinking, well, they really restored it well, and then eventually I figured out that it wasn't that. But that's the first time. And then when we did the movie, I spent before we shot the movie, like almost 6 weeks learning how to ride a horse and doing all these things in Palermo, and so I was in Sicily for over 4 months, and on a horseback and all these things, and I was the only probably half Sicilian actor, anyone who had any Sicilian blood in the whole film. The film is, I guess you would say, gigantically miscast. There was no one who was correctly cast in it. And
why was that, you think? Was that just...
I have no idea. I mean, I just, I don't know. It was in English, and Gore Vidal wrote it, and it's just, I mean, it looks really beautiful and everything, but there was no one... There was one Yugoslavian actor who was more, appropriate for it or whatever. But I guess if it's dubbed, it's probably a lot better, like in Italy.
Yeah.
But anyway, it was a fantastic experience for me as far as, meeting people. I had all these Spanish trainers who taught me how to ride a horse like a conquistador, and I loved being there. Unfortunately, the people in the film hung out with just the aristocrats, not really with the poor people, or the middle class people.
Yeah.
And so, and the crew was English, but still, it was a big experience, for me. I was outside, I was in the mountains, and I really took to it. I took to it like a country boy, and I was not a country boy.
Was there, do you think, anything about just knowing you were in Sicily, sort of where family came from?
It was, but Sicily, I had studied Italian, and I was doing quite well. When I went to Sicily, I was completely lost.
Oh yeah.
And then I was surrounded by an English crew, and you have to be forced to at least practice the Italian I was studying.
Yeah.
And so that didn't help so much. I certainly became very familiar with the landscape.
Yeah.
I remember I got so used to being in the mountains. When I came home, I was like, man, everything is too flat for me.
Yeah.
But still, I was where my grandfather and grandmother was from. And then the following year, 87, I did a TV movie with Sophia Loren. We shot in Belgrade. And then my wife and I went, I think we were maybe just married. We went to Dubrovnik. We took the boat to Bari. Oh. And I met, there were some brothers of my father's who were still alive, and I met all our relatives there, and my father was still alive, and he was sick, and he really would have liked to have gone back, but he never went back.
So in 1980, you had a really small part in Raging Bull, and I'm just wondering, how did you get into a Scorsese movie so early in your career?
I was in a play. Michael Badalucco was in the play. I replaced him, and De Niro came to Tooth of Crime by Sam Shepard, and then he saw Michael, and then he saw me. He asked us to come in, and we prepared a scene from the book. Because my dad was an amateur boxer, I had all these boxing books. I used to collect them, and so I'd have something to talk to my father about, that he liked. And so we did this scene, and for Scorsese and De Niro, we were just kids. It was my first professional audition, and I did that over a period of a year.
Oh, wow.
They kept bringing us back, but we were too young. And so Mike got his SAG card, and I got one line, but I didn't get my card. So, but since then, I've worked a lot with Bob, and I've worked with Marty, and also a lot of movies that Marty has executive produced. And, I've always shown him movies that I've directed and things like that.
You first worked with Spike Lee in Do the Right Thing, and that came out in 1989. And I'm just wondering, he has a lot of Italians in his films. What were those discussions like about?
Well, he grew up in an Italian, his best friend was Italian. And I grew up in a black neighborhood, for first 6 years of my life. I went to a black junior high school. So we have a lot of things, in common. And I mean, I give Spike, he likes to stir the pot and everything. But
Yeah.
when I had to do the right thing, he asked me what role that I want. And I thought, I'd rather play the racist because I thought the father isn't really, and the other brother's more open-minded. But I thought the movie was about that, and I could maybe help illuminate that a little bit. And I really got to do the other side of that very much in Jungle Fever. And I felt like that was really nice to be able to do that. And though that film isn't really celebrated the same way, that maybe it's not as dramaturgically constructed as Do the Right Thing, which takes place all in one day, that really meant a lot to me to be able to do that, to show the other side of that, which is probably closer to me than the other guy. But
Than Pino.
yeah,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
I did work around people, and I observed them, and it wasn't a stretch. But there was 3 of us, so which I thought was pretty, egalitarian of him, and pretty, he didn't like say this is the only kind of person there is in this family.
Yeah.
And there wasn't.
Yeah, it was complicated.
You know what I mean? It was complicated.
But I love that idea when when Daniela is talking to you and says, like, why are you so angry? Like, he wasn't like beating him down. He really wanted to know.
Yeah, like, why are you angry?
Like,
and he's like saying, well, I can't be,
My friends make fun of me.
Yeah, right.
Well,
it's true. If you went from, Bay Ridge to Fitz-Stuyvesant, people say, oh, you're going to go, serve people these food, you're a servant. And in my life, I mean, my first friends were, my best friend was black. I was like, I didn't have any white friends until I moved to a white neighborhood, and then everyone thought I was, Puerto Rican, and I didn't even know what Puerto Rican was. I was like, I knew Cuban Spanish, but and then from your own group, people saying all kinds of things, nasty things to you, and you're like, what are they saying to me? Like I don't even know, I don't understand what they're saying, and once they put in the word greasy, then I started getting the idea, you know what I mean? So
I saw a Q&A with you where you were talking about your film Mac from 1992. That was the first film you directed, and you were saying that as a film about Italian brothers, you had a hard time getting that off the ground because
sure, it's a movie not about the criminals. There's no mafia guy in the movie.
Were you ever asked about that?
Yeah, it was like sure. It was like if it would have been a crime film, I would have been able to make it 1, 2, 3, and because of and I made a very unsentimental version of it.
Yeah,
I didn't do it that the brothers all hug each other at the end, which is what if he wanted to buy it. Before we made the movie, he'd be a co-producer. Harvey Weinstein wanted me to do, and I was like, I'm not doing that.
Oh, he wanted. He
said the brothers. He said the brothers should make up. Brothers fight. Well, in his situation, maybe he was wrong. You know what I mean? So I'm just saying, And I said, well, that not always.
Yeah.
I said, and that's the point of the movie. There are movies that make you feel better when you see it. And you go, oh, I don't. And there are other movies to make you go, wow. I wonder if they ever got together, or I wonder how I would do in that situation. And I wanted it to be that there was this gap, and the guy at the end passes something on good about his brothers and him.
Well, that's what I love that last scene, because
That's
that
the whole
was
movie.
It was a very painful space where you took him to, the son. And it could have been like, oh, this terrible thing happened, but it was like we built something here.
That's right. We made something.
Yeah.
And he goes, and in the doing of it, that's the joy of it. That's the thing. Yeah. To me, that was worth making the whole movie.
Yeah.
If you could earn that. Yeah. And I felt like that a lot of people, and not just Italian Americans, a lot of working class people over the years have seen it, and they say, that's like, that movie is about my family. Yeah. They tell me, and I'm like, that's why I made it. Yeah. It's not just about one family.
The funeral scene was interesting to me because it got me thinking about only stories I've heard that I've never experienced of like professional wailers at Italian
Yeah.
funerals.
Yeah, well, people used to go to funerals to like my mother when she was a kid. She used to go to funerals like to to eat and stuff. You know what I mean? And they would like make believe they were crying and stuff. But yeah, you would see people, be themselves. But when we did that in the movie, we cast all like real people, and we started talking about it, and it got out of control a little bit because one woman started crying who was my mother's friend, and one thing led to another, and I was like, I didn't have enough money. If I would have had one more day, I could have filmed them. I could have made the sequence even bigger.
But she was really crying?
Oh yeah, one woman just broke down. She just broke down.
Why though?
Because she was it was a neighbor of ours. She was Sicilian, crazy. And I gave her one line. I said, just say to the guy, now you come.
Oh,
now
wow.
you come after all this time. Now you come. And she said that, and she just broke. And that was like a chain reaction around the whole room. And all these people, they weren't actors. They were basically, a lot of them they could speak Sicilian. People just started, it was like a real funeral. I was like, everyone's crying. I was like, let's try to capture some of this,
Mm-hmm.
And, that's a very, I say Southern Italian thing,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? It's just like people, it's just, I couldn't believe it. It was like, this is unbelievable. Like, it was just really, and my mother knew it too. She said, she'll go. She said, all you got to do is just give her one thing. And then she asked a great question. Gracie, may she rest in peace, Gracie. She said to me, this acting stuff, she was drying up after, because it interests me, like, how far can you go?
Mm.
I said, well, you can go as far as, like, not hurting another person.
Yeah.
I was like, this is like, Daniel Day-Lewis stuff, you know what I mean? Robert De Niro stuff, She understood it. There's something about that if I had the opportunity, I would do more of that. Because you act with a non-actor, you're up against it in some ways. They may not have the range of expression, but they have a solidity there, that maybe you gotta, attain.
I want to move the conversation to talk about putting history on film. And about 5 years after Mac, you played Primo Levi in Francesco Rosi's final film, The Truce. How did you get to work with Rosi?
I was doing the play of Arturo Ui, The Irresistible Rise of Arturo Ui by Brecht, which I was working on for like a year, playing basically Hitler.
Yeah.
And Barton Fink premiered in Cannes, and we won all these awards, and I won an award for Best Actor and everything. And when I came back, I was doing the play, and I got a letter from Scorsese saying, Francesco Rosi wants to meet you. He's one of the best directors in the world. I have his films. I will screen Salvatore Giuliano for you. I have my own print. And he did.
Oh, wow.
And he gave me all these VHS films of his. And I was a big Italian movie buff, a big neorealist fan. And, I became tremendous friends with Rosi. I mean, it wasn't immediate. He was a very taciturn guy in some ways. But was a real love affair that I had with him. And we worked 5 years on the film before we did it. And I got to know Primo Levi's work.
Yeah.
I mean, everything he's ever written, more than once. I read, you would say, not every book written about the Holocaust, but all the big writers I read. And so, but Primo Levi, I think of just as a great writer. So it was like going for a doctorate.
Right.
I mean, I was going to do The Truce in Italian, and I was studying it, and then they decided to do it in English because they get more money.
Yeah.
But then I wanted to dub myself in Italian, and a lot of people wanted me to, but Francesco felt my accent wasn't perfect. And I felt like, well, it's me instead of someone else doing it. So, but anyway, I didn't. And it's not a perfect film, but it's something I'm very thankful and proud to have participated in.
So when did you first learn about Joe Petrosino?
Well, I know about Petrosino through the film Pay or Die.
Okay.
And that was made, I think, in the early 60s.
Yeah, 1960.
Yeah, it's not a very big budget movie.
Yeah.
And whatever. But Ernest Borgnine, when he plays Petrosino, he's really good in that movie.
Yes.
It's a beautiful performance. And it got under my skin as a little kid because I was like, first of all, there wasn't a lot of mafia movies when I was a kid. The gangster movies were all from the 30s, from Warner Brothers. So they were Irish and Italian, and Humphrey Bogart, who whoever he played, it wasn't so ethnic. My father loved those movies, and I loved those movies too.
Yeah.
And I mean, Edward G. Robinson, who could speak Italian, I always think like I'm his successor because he played almost all Italians, and I play a lot of Jews. Yeah. So I'm like, well, it's balanced now, Edward G. And he's one of my favorites. But Ernest Borgnine, when he plays Petrosino, and he had that fight with that guy in the warehouse, and that I'll never forget. He has all the pens. He's going to take the test, and he's studying to pass the test. I guess he failed it maybe one time.
Actually, in the movie, he failed a test that would promote him to captain, I think, like 5 times. And I will tell you that is the thing that the Petrosino family really hated about that movie. They felt it made him look kind of stupid, and there's not even any evidence that he took the test 5 times, let alone failed it 5 times.
Well, it's liberty. It's when someone from a family hates the film, that's not a fair criticism because they're coming from like it didn't happen this way.
Okay,
and when you make a movie, in order to make a movie, you got to make it. Yeah. You got to take certain liberty. Yeah. All I know is that it affected me when I was in Sicily, of course. And I went to the square, and I was at night, and I was, imagining what happened to him. And obviously, he was a pretty, confident and competent guy. And maybe he was overconfident when he went to Sicily, but it was in the papers that he was going there. That's so right. Everyone knew that already. But obviously, though all these people, 250,000 people attended his funeral, they knew he stood for something.
That's right.
And that he also was trying to combat this terrible, image of this group of people that he was part of. There was a huge prejudice against Southern Italians, this illiterate group of people. Let's face it, and it was a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant world, and then that's when eugenics came, and the Southern Italians, they were considered like a subspecies. Yeah. I mean, the people said you couldn't find a worse group of people. They're not governable. Yeah. But a lot of these people were very poor, and a lot of them were hardworking people. But it's a complicated, history. In Italy, they grew up under the yoke of all these invaders. It's centuries of trauma that you don't shake so easily. You're just thinking like, okay, let's stick to our own. Like, don't go to the police. Don't have a trust in someone else. And so it's really resonant, and that Petrosino formed his own Italian squad, and that they let them do that. Yeah. That they said, okay, you deal with these people. Yeah. What shocks me is how people who are from that, I guess, Southern Italian background or whatever, as they've gotten opportunity and education and they've intermarried or whatever, how they've left that completely behind. Yeah. It surprises me that all of a sudden you weren't considered white, and now you're white. The box was other. They've forgotten where they came from.
Yeah. I want to circle back to Paradise for a second. In the lead up to the film's release, Ernest Borgnine, you can see him in the press always talking about how he had turned down the role of Al Capone because as an Italian American, he felt that was going a little bit too far. And I'm just wondering, as an Italian American, how often you're approached to play criminals, and how do you make those decisions?
So many times. I can't tell you in the last half a year how many times. Criminal. I mean, I'm older now.
Being offered.
Yeah. I mean, when I was younger, it happened all the time. Yeah. I mean, I've played a bunch of them, and I've tried not to. Yeah. I've turned so many of those things down when it's just exploitive or whatever, But every once in a while, I've done this or I've done that. I did Batman because I wanted to be in Batman, and I told them I only will do certain things. Then they wanted me to do a TV series. I said no, I don't want to do that. I mean, thank God Joel and Ethan cast me in in certain other roles, and it opened up a lot of parts for me. And if you're a trained actor and you've done Shakespeare, and I've done Ibsen, and I've done Beckett, it's like you want to go into different worlds and different cultures. And I think if I was in another country, I would be just looked upon as a regular person. Yeah. But in this country, if you have any kind of color, you have to like reinvent yourself constantly because you're going to be put in to certain stories, not all the time. Yeah. But they're not imaginative. Yeah. But I didn't want to be an actor to play a certain kind of Italian American that I wasn't even interested in as a kid. Like I'm someone who grew up, my dad was very, very honest as a person. You could be emotionally all over the place, but very, very honest. And he was around a lot of those people. He had workers who were under him who became big builders who went in with, the other side or the black hand and he never did. And he used to tell me to stay away from those people. And I know people who had stores and even friends now who grew up in Brooklyn. And I have a friend who was a doctor and his father had a butcher shop and everyone had to pay protection in Carroll Gardens. And if they wanted something in the middle of the night, they'd call you up. You have to get up, cut the meat, bring it to them, give it to them. And you don't get paid. And that's how it goes. And so that was the parasitic nature of it was something. I was around some of these people too. And my father used to tell me, do not look at them. And yet he was fascinated to watch it in a movie.
What did you think of The Godfather when it came out?
I loved The Godfather when I saw it. It was just mesmerizing for me. And Al Pacino in the movie is so American in some ways. He fights for the army, he does all those things. I don't think The Godfather really, it's not like a real examination of the ruthlessness of the entire, there's something romantic about it. And so Italian Americans, when they saw that movie, they could recognize family dynamics and their family. Yeah. And that, for once, like we're powerful.
No, I understand. When you talk about there being something romantic about The Godfather, I really understand that. But, for me, it doesn't feel that way, for example, with The Sopranos. And I wonder, were you ever approached to work on that series?
Yeah. They had offered me, because I had done Mac, to be one of the first season directors. But I was doing my second film, Illuminata. And unfortunately, my mother was over. And I should have watched it by myself. But my head was in a different place. And my mother was like, what were these guys? She didn't like it at all. She didn't, really like the pilot. And I read the episode that was very well written. And Tim Van Patten, who's a wonderful director, did it. And I just said, I'm just not available. I'm still editing and whatever.
But your mother didn't.
Yeah, but my mother was like, oh, these guys, it's the same old thing and blah, blah, blah. And then they, later on asked me, would I want to be on the show, like third year or something. And I met David Chase. And by then I had watched some of it in a hotel room. And I was like, wow, this is really good. This is kind of like suburbia. And it's like, there's metaphors in it and everything. And then I said, well, David, I've been fighting to get away from that genre. I don't want to be in that genre. Of course, there was a lot of people who wanted the part. Yeah. They offered me the part because I didn't want to do it. And Joey Pants did it, and he was really good. He was excellent. And there's a lot of my cousins in it, and James is a wonderful actor. I work with James. But even James, he said, it's too much for me. He said, he even told me one time when he was like, so if I never meet another Italian American, he goes, I would be very happy. Now I understand there's a genre, and I think there's room for that. Yeah. But I was conflicted about being on that show because I don't want to be around that world all the time. And I know people who don't even sound a certain way. And if they see you, they'll say, hey, Anthony, hey, I love your podcast. Or that Turturro, you shouldn't have said those things, And they don't really talk that way. Yeah. And their parents probably didn't talk that way. So they become an exaggeration of that. But there's something about watching a bad person that's thrilling. So it's not just about the Italians. It's like watching someone who does things that we wouldn't do.
Yeah.
But I'm more interested in Falcone,
Yeah.
who got blown up, or Petrosino. I mean, you finally tell a story about someone who combated the worst of his community with the best of his community, and for the majority of his community.
That's right. I'm not sure there's a better note to end on. John, this has been such an incredible conversation for me. Thank you so much for taking the time and for sharing your stories.
My pleasure.
This episode was produced and written by me, with research provided by myself and my good friend and film historian, Kevin Kultz. Theme music by Mick Giacchino. For True Crimes of Black Hand, New York, I'm Anthony Giacchino. See you next time.